Welcome. Today we have an episode on the trade deadline. I thought I would put together a list of the top movable guys this deadline. It's a little tricky, especially when I was new back to the league. So there'll definitely be lots of stuff everyone would disagree on, but I thought it'd be a decent consensus and better than nothing. So what I did is I looked at all the teams with their financials and I made a list for each of the bottom teams that were like definitely out of the playoffs. So you can see here it's labeled sellers for the bottom four team, and there's a few in the hunt. The AL is really interesting because the top five are like ridiculously far ahead of the last wild card spot. So really, you have all these teams highlighted here fighting for the sixth wild card. I know a lot can change, but man, like a 15 game lead at this point in the season with all these top five good teams here, pretty radical difference. So obviously, some crazy stuff could happen. Like one of these teams could fall off, but most likely you're going to have a real cockfight for that last wild card spot. This is the win pace. So if you actually look at the wins right now, so you got 46, 43, 44, 43, 43, 42. So even 38 technically would only be 8 back, but you got to figure it'd be this group of teams here that are really fighting for it. And then you have a little tighter race. So you got the top 3 way ahead of everybody in the NL here. And then you have a couple real good contending teams, 53 all the way down to 48, real close. 45 is still alive too, for sure. But again, it's probably this group that's really going to be fighting for those last 3 spots, 3 teams for 5 spots. But yeah, definitely don't count out St. Louis or LAD. They got some hitters there for sure. But yeah, so it'll be really interesting. You got the sellers down here for sure. I'd say Arizona down for San Francisco. So you can see the money that each team has left too. That's a big factor in these lists. I don't just list the best players. What I do is I do a factor of everything. So you got what factors really high is the expiring contracts, because if teams rebuilding, they're not necessarily going to let up like a 25-year-old star if he has like 3 years team control left. So the guys that ranked really high on these trade deadline lists, kind of like real life, the guys that are like 32-year-old expiring, especially like relievers and stuff, guys that fit and slot in nicely on any of the teams going for it. So in real life, like if there's an elite like 34-year-old reliever like Adonis Chapman or something, those type of guys always seem to get moved for really high value because they can just go to whatever team and fit there pretty easily. And you can get a nice return out of them, and it doesn't cost the team losing them a lot. So you get those type of guys, or you get a really, really old guy with like 1 or 2 years left on a losing team, which we have a couple of on the list. The guys that rank pretty highly that get bumped down a little bit, but they're still really high in the list, but they're probably the most talented, would be like those 27, 28-year-olds with only like 1 year left of arbitration on those small market teams. So that's when their value is the absolute highest, because you can lock them up for like the rest of this year and maybe 1 more year, and then you can have a longer chance to sign them to a long-term contract instead of being rushed and get them on the expiring deal this year. So those guys are really talented. They're probably the most talented guys on this list. And then you get a lot of like veteran defenders, like guys that you could, add in as like a utility guy or like a backup shortstop on a contending team to make sure if your guy goes down, you're not hooped. The catchers are really weak too, so there's a couple catchers that rank pretty high on this list. But anyways, without further ado, let's get started. So on number 25, you got Alejandro Rosario. So he's got 3.6 and 3.6 left. So 2 years, but a nice veteran reliever, 75 stuff in the bullpen, can also spot start, pretty nice talent. Number 24, we got Ailman here. The Cubs, just a nice expiring reliever, high movement, so good in those home run ballparks. I think he's got like 50 stuff, 75 movement. Cubs don't have a lot of money, so I'm not too sure how likely that one is to happen. Number 23, we got Yordan Alvarez. This is a guy that has a player option next year, so most likely won't opt out, but he is having a decent season here. Got a lot of power still at this point in his career. So pretty nice option there if you really need a power lefty bat. That's obviously got a lot of veteran leadership and all that. Jeremy Hall ranks a little bit lower in this list than his talent would probably indicate, because he has so much left on his contract. So those a lot of teams are out on him because they can't afford him in the next 2 years. But a really talented, high movement reliever that is making 5, 11, and 14 million next 3 years. So probably could rank in the top 10 talent-wise, because you add a reliever like him to a high leverage spot on a playoff team. He's pretty valuable. Next up is Ed Howard. Ed Howard is a nice, reliable defensive shortstop, expiring 14 million. Miami can't quite retain all of that, but they can retain a decent chunk. So if they retain, like, say, 50%, You'd only have to pay a couple million here to have a nice veteran guy that can play the middle of the field for the rest of the season. Pretty good. Top 20 here, we got Ripley, just another veteran reliever. Nice expiring. You could non-tender him, or you could bring him back for cheap again next year. Pretty solid value. Another reliever here. Again, these guys always ranked really high. Everyone needs good relievers. Jerry Nielsen here, 65 stuff, 50 movement. On Toronto, they can retain everything too, having a decent year. Alex Resendez here is a real question mark in my mind. He always seems to outperform the ratings. I'll go to him in game. He is a guy that with only 35 contacts shouldn't be hitting as good as he is, but he has a large enough sample size where it's definitely legit. Every single year he hits like 230, 250 with like 30 bombs every single season. He's 37, 32, 36, 35, 27, 22. So absolute monster. This is actually his best pace season yet, on pace for 50 bombs. So for whatever reason, he just absolutely crushes it, even though he's stronger against lefties and righties, where there's less lefties in the league than righties. But yeah, for whatever reason, he just is one of those guys that just always outperforms his ratings. So you got to treat him like the large sample size shows, because proof is in the pudding. Next up, we have John Coleman on Cleveland, a really high stuff, high movement reliever / starter guy that just wicked stuff, which is always really valuable. So you can bring him in and have him next year for pretty cheap too. So nice value there. Nice like mid 30s, real old veteran number 4, number 5 type starter. You can bring in low stuff, but really high movement control. Just that perfect, typical guy. If you're having some injuries in your starting rotation, you bring him in for real cheap from Baltimore. And he's just a guy that can solidify your number 4 or 5 spot. If you're struggling there, have some young guys there that aren't performing well, really solid. Next up, we have Cody Bellinger, a real, I highlight him orange because he's a shocker. Could be anywhere in the top 3 or all the way down to 15 because he's making so much money. I don't think there's many teams that can afford the 26 and 37. The reason I put him on this list, though, is because he's such an elite bat still, 60 contact and like 65 power kind of thing. He can come in and be like a best hitter on like a 100-win team, which is insanely valuable. And he's only making 18 million, which isn't crazy. There's a good chance at 41 years old he's going to retire, so you probably won't have to pay the last 2 years of the deal. And there's a really high chance he'll retire after next year, because then he'll be going into his 43-year-old season at that $37 million player option. But the reason he's a little bit lower in this list than that is just because the risk, if he does for whatever reason really regress, which he obviously will at that age. But I don't know. He's just defying old man logic right now. But if you do have to pay that 37, you're kind of screwed, because that's a crazy amount of money for most teams. There's a few small teams that can afford that, but not many. So that's a really tricky one. So it was really hard to include him on this list, but he was just too talented of a bat. The most likely outcome is he does come to a contender and he absolutely mashes for like a 140 WRC plus, and he goes off into the sunset after this year, next year. I'd say the odds of that are probably like 75, 80%, maybe even 90%, because like nobody really plays to like 43, 44 in this game. But again, could pull some Tom Brady shit in play. So we'll see. But I was really tempted to put him in the top 10, but I just figure there's not a ton of teams at the top that can afford him. If you look, Pittsburgh, Washington, these teams don't have a ton of money left. The only team that has quite a bit is Toronto, but probably be the most likely fit. But yeah, that was a really tricky one. Philly would actually probably be the main fit, 22 million they have. But yeah, anyways, that was hard to do. So that's the reason he's down there, but could easily be in the top 5 if you really are confident he's going to retire. Next up, we have Josh Robinson, another team that can retain everything. He's got a really nice profile as a high movement, again, kind of like the exact same as that Baltimore pitcher we just talked about, except he's higher in this list because he's a high leader and they can retain everything. And he's an Iron Man. So exactly like the profile we talked about underneath with the Baltimore guy down here, Jacob Smith, except he can also, Josh Robinson can be fully retained and be like probably a tad better. He's a pretty high level guy, on pace for 3.6 F4 there. And really nice FIP, 60 stamina, high leader. So just brings a lot to the table. Next up, we have Aaron Yarbrough. Aaron Yarbrough is listed as the wrong team here. Let me fix that. Okay, so Aaron Yarbrough is on Cleveland, making almost $27 million a year, but an elite middle of the field defender that has a huge eye, on pace for a pretty big time season. So he couldn't really be much lower in this list with how valuable that is when you can have a guy in the middle of the field that gets on base and plays top defense. Super, super valuable. So you bring him in, play second short on a good team. play either, start at one, be backup at both utility guys. So really can probably retain like 80% of his deal, Cleveland can. And then you'd only have to pay a couple million here and get a real nice veteran middle of the field guy. So that's why he's that high on the list. Next up, I'll have to fix that later. Next up, we have Ed Jones. Ed Jones is a right fielder on Montreal with an 80 arm, absolute rocket. He has 50 range, so he's a pretty good defender, and he has a real nice bat. So he's got, let me go back here. So he's got 60 I, 55 power. He's got a little bit of question marks with the mentals. That's a nice thing about bringing in a short-term guy. He's just a rental for a few months here. He's a guy that Montreal probably need a pretty decent return for, because I'd imagine they can get a compensation pick for him. That'll be a little questionable because he hasn't been that good. That'll be a little bit risky. He'd probably accept that offer. But anyways, that's a pretty nice bat, though. So you bring that in, guy that plays really high-level left field, pretty decent right field, can even survive in center with a little bit of experience there if shit really hits the fan. But really, really nice bat there on a really movable contract. So that'll be that's why he's ranks in the top 12. Bobby Aycock, really good player on Baltimore. Most likely going to opt out. He's a pretty talented player. His demand would probably be over 15 million, but it's not 100%. But he's also a pretty good deal for 15 next year. But most likely you'd get him as a rental for just a few months. High level center fielder. Really, really impact player in the past. Had a bit of a down year this year, but like extremely talented player. So probably could have had him in the top 7 or 8 in hindsight, but a little tough to rank these guys in the top 10. They're all pretty good. Mike Burdett, another guy in Montreal. He is a monster behind the plate defensively, and there's so few good catchers in this league. Even with a 40 bat, he's still one of the average or almost above average offensive catchers in the league, just because it's such a, if you look at the catchers in this league, just sort them in the player search. It's crazy. There's only 2 guys with over 50 contact in the entire league. So yeah, it's just a black hole hitting wise. So the guy that can bring you 70 ability, which is one of the best in the entire league, and also have a somewhat respectable bat, really high ranked on this list. Probably could have had him in the top 5 actually. Chad Kuhn was a really talented, like 75 movement reliever on a really cheap deal on Oakland. He's 33 years old, so they'll most likely move on from him, but they also could hold on to him for next year, and he'll be worth even more next year in an expiring deal. But really talented dude. That's why he's up here in this list. Kyber Ruiz, pretty much the same reason as Burdett. Probably should flip them actually, just because the second year. Burdett's a little more movable as an expiring guy. But Kyber also kind of 9.6 is pretty nice to lock up for that next year, since there's so few good catchers. He's probably worth it. Really good ability, defensive guy. He's a high leadership and popular guy that helps your fans a little bit. So really good all-around profile. It's a little more expensive. They wouldn't really be able to retain much on him, so you'd have to pay most of that. But I feel like a few of the top teams really need a catcher, especially Pittsburgh. So you probably see a nice fit in a couple of those teams. Next up, we have Irvin Medina. Medina has 8 million for this year and next year. Incredibly talented player, really high ratings. He's probably one of the highest rated relievers in the entire league. He's got like 70 control, 65 movement, 3 pitches, a kind of a fourth, extreme ground ball guy, throws 100 miles an hour, just has an absolute ton to love. Really nice career, pretty much never been a negative WAR reliever, so just consistent's the name of the game for him. So yeah, he ranks really highly in this list. Next up, we have Greg Spencer, an absolute rock star. Really tempted to put him in the top 3. I just figured he lowered a bit because I don't know 100% if he'll move, but he has an amazing defensive profile, awesome mentals. He's popular. He is fragile, but that's fine when he's pretty old and injuries aren't very high in this league. Huge bat. Really nice all-around player. Again, I probably would rank him in the top 3 or 4. It's just they could easily hold on to him for another year where he's pretty cheap at 8 million, and he'll be probably just you need a monster package to move him. I'd imagine they hold on to him unless they got a really nice return, but that's why he wasn't in the top 5, because I thought there's a pretty decent chance he wouldn't be moved, but we'll see. Easily could have been in the top 3 or 4. Francisco Crispin, by the time this actually posts, I just traded for him actually after I made this list. He is a guy that's making a lot of money, but he is also really good. He isn't having a great year, and since it's been really hard to pitch, but I'm loving the ratings. There's just not many guys do the triple 60 thing here. Ground ball guy with 2 really high level pitches, veteran. just has 3 World Series rings, brings a lot to the table. Doesn't rock the boat. You just bring him in, like it says in his personality. Bring him in to any team, high stamina, can just pitch some quality relief innings, kind of be like a setup type guy. I just really liked the fact that he's really movable, which is why he's really high in this list because he's almost guaranteed to move. Well, he is because I trade for him, but he was a guy that is on expiring deals, a 33-year-old in Cincy that probably can't afford to bring him back because he wants a ton of money. So just a guy I thought would be really helpful for a few months. That's why I had him pretty high. Next up, we have Loria for San Francisco. San Francisco has this reliever that's just a monster. He could easily be number 1 or 2 in this list just because he's so talented at 20 years old, but he fell a few spots because, again, the same thing as that Oakland guy we just talked about, the third baseman. I think there's a pretty good chance he returns next year. I know San Francisco GM's been a little busy in real life, it seems like, so I don't know how active he'll be tonight because there's not much time before the deadline, but he is a really good player. 70 stuff, 60 control, type of guy you can trade for, and he'd be the best player in your bullpen for a few years and probably be worth like 15 million a year on an extension. So had to rank really highly on this list, but probably one of the most talented relief arms in all of baseball, which is why he's in the top 4 here. Bob Peterson is on Miami. He ranks in at number 3. Peterson at first I didn't think would move, but the more I thought about it, probably made more sense. His value is very high. And again, just like we talked about with a bunch of those guys, we just talked about San Francisco and the Miami guys. He has one more year that's pretty reasonable for how good he is money-wise at only $8.5 million arbitration. So his package to get him would probably be pretty significant, but very talented player. A guy that can play all 3 outfield spots, a really high-level first base, huge contact and power, which is very sought after. So a big-time talent there. Could go into any team and be one of the top 3 or 4 hitters. San Francisco has another guy in this list. This guy is bona fide ace material, or definitely like a really high-end number 2, low-end ace. Has that 55, 60, 55 combination with 100-mile-an-hour, 75 fastball. Elite stuff on that fastball there. So really just like a 3.5 pitch guy. Really talented. Guy's on San Francisco Pitchers Park on a pretty losing team and still puts up monster wars. Could totally see him going to New Orleans or Pittsburgh's and just putting up like a 5 or 6 war season type thing. He is expiring, so the reason he's so high on this list is he's almost like a must move for them. And they could qualify him, he'll decline and then only get like a first round pick, or they could trade him for like 3 top prospects. So probably going to need some really top level guys to get him, but pretty much as good as gets pitching wise on this list. Really good. And then number 1, we actually have Oakland's monster bat. This was again a little tricky ranking because he has another year left, but so it's really expensive though, which is why he's number 1. I bumped their third baseman down a bit because he only had an $8 million year next year, so I figured they might bring him back. It's pretty reasonable, but I don't know if Oakland can afford a $20 million guy next year, and then that would put a lot of pressure on them next year to move him. So I thought this would probably be where his value is at an all-time high. Absolutely insane bat. You lock him in as number 2, 3, 4 hitter in any team in baseball, and he is your best or second best hitter in the lineup for any team. Just an elite bat. Really good defender at first base, high work ethic, fly ball hitter. Could even survive at third base for a few innings if you really need, but type of guy that's on pace for a 40-40 season with 40 doubles, 40 home runs, hitting over 300 in a real big pitcher's park, so that's even harder. Could even hit you could see him going to friggin' Colorado or somewhere and hitting like 340. Just one of the premier hitters in the league, and really good value this year at $13 million for how talented he is at only 20 years old. You could bring him in and give him like a 7-year extension if you're a big budget team, or you could just get him for a year and a half if you were not able to afford him long term. And you could always trade for him and flip him again next year. So number 1 on this list, absolute superstar talent, real good bat to bring in. So that can really change your playoff hopes there if you bring in a guy like that. So that would take a monster package, but that's why he's up there. So that was my reasoning for all the picks there. I can just show you guys this list for a few seconds there, and then I'll end the video. I hope you guys enjoy, and happy trade deadline.